Elias Vance was seconds away from finalizing the largest corporate merger of his career. The Sterling Corporation deal promised to elevate his company, Vance Innovations, into the stratosphere of the tech world. Billions were on the table. Everything was ready. All he had to do was sign the contract. The atmosphere in the 40th floor boardroom was thick with the scent of victory and expensive cologne. The air crackled with anticipated celebration. His partner, Marcus Thorne, stood beside him, a triumphant glint in his eye. Across the massive mahogany table, Javier Sterling, the CEO of the acquiring firm, beamed, his pen already uncapped. Just as Elias picked up his own pen, a custom-made Mont Blanc that felt unnaturally heavy in his hand, the boardroom door opened discreetly. Isabella, a cleaning employee, entered, pushing her cart with a quiet efficiency that was designed to make her invisible. "I'm sorry, I'll just empty the trash quickly," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes fixed on the floor. No one seemed to care. They were too busy, their minds already on the champagne toasts and press releases that would follow. They were celebrating a victory that was not yet real. Isabella approached the wastebasket next to Elias's chair. She knelt, pretending to adjust the plastic liner. Then she leaned in, her head close to his, and whispered, her voice almost inaudible, a ghost of a sound against the backdrop of corporate chatter. "Don't sign. It's a trap." Elias froze. His hand stopped, hovering millimeters from the paper. The pen slipped from his numb fingers and landed softly on the polished wood of the table. The sound was imperceptible to everyone else, but to him it was as loud as a gunshot. "What?" he murmured, his voice a choked whisper. Isabella stood up slowly, her expression serious for a fraction of a second before she averted her gaze, her face becoming a mask of professional indifference. She picked up the wastebasket and pushed her cart towards the door. Just another day at work, or so it seemed, but Elias couldn't take his eyes off her. His partner, Marcus, leaned in, a strange, tight smile on his face. "Everything all right, Elias? Are you ready to sign, Mr. Vance?" Javier asked from across the table, his voice laced with a new, sharp edge of impatience. Elias swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. The contract was still there, pristine and waiting. The folder with the details of the merger lay open before everyone. He looked at Marcus, then at Javier, and finally at the door, where Isabella was about to disappear. The entire world felt slightly off-kilter, as if the room had tilted on its axis. "I need 5 minutes," he said, standing up abruptly. 5 minutes! Marcus tried to sound light, casual, but his eyes narrowed. "Is everything okay?" "I just need to take care of something," Elias replied, already walking towards the door. "Mr. Vance, everyone is here. All the terms have been reviewed. There's nothing left to change," Javier protested, his impatience now visible. 5 minutes, Elias repeated firmly, not waiting for another word. He stepped out of the boardroom and closed the door behind him, the sound echoing in the suddenly silent hallway. Isabella was just a few steps away, pushing her cart. When she heard his hurried footsteps behind her, she stopped. "You," Elias said, his voice firm, "with me, now." She hesitated, her eyes wide with surprise, but she nodded. They walked in silence to a small, empty break room down the hall. Elias entered first. She followed. He closed the door firmly and faced her, his eyes blazing with an intensity she had never seen before. "Explain, now, and convince me that you're not completely insane for interrupting me like that." Isabella was still holding a small trash bag in one of her hands. "I know how this sounds, sir, but there have been conversations, things that no one else heard. They're deceiving you." "Who is they?" "Sterling, and your partner, Mr. Thorne." Her voice trembled for a moment, then steadied. "They're using the contract to transfer hidden debts and stabilize their own company at the expense of yours. If you sign, you'll be handing them everything for free." Elias stared at her for a long, silent moment. A part of him wanted to laugh, to dismiss her as a delusional, attention-seeking employee. But another part of him, a part that had learned to trust his gut over the years, felt a cold chill run down his spine. "What's your name?" "Isabella." "How long have you worked here?" "8 months, on the night shift." "All right, Isabella." He took a step forward, his gaze unwavering. "If this is a lie, a conspiracy theory, or an attempt to get attention, you're fired, on the spot." Isabella bit her lip, but she didn't look away. "I understand, and I accept that. But if I stay silent and you lose everything, I would never forgive myself." Elias turned and stared at his reflection in the dark glass of the window. The city of Chicago continued to spin and glitter outside, but his own world had just cracked. This woman had nothing to gain and everything to lose. And yet, here she was. "Do you have proof?" "I have photos, records, screenshots. I can show you tonight at 7, right here." Elias nodded, his mind racing. "Bring everything. If you don't convince me, it will be your last day here." Isabella just nodded in agreement. He waited for her to leave before leaning his forehead against the cool glass of the window. Outside, the contract was still waiting for his signature. But now, for the first time in his entire career, he hesitated. He had built his empire on calculated risks and decisive action. But this was a risk he had never anticipated. A whisper from the most unlikely of sources had just thrown his entire world into question. Elias returned to the boardroom, with his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. Everyone turned as he entered, their faces a mixture of curiosity and annoyance. Marcus was leaning over the table, whispering something to Javier Sterling, but he straightened up quickly, his expression carefully neutral. "Did you resolve whatever needed resolving?" Marcus asked, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Yes," Elias said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. He walked back to the table but didn't sit down. He looked at the contract, then at the faces around him. "Actually, I think I need to review a few clauses again." "Review?" Javier's brow furrowed, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Mr. Vance, we've spent weeks analyzing every detail of this document. And that's precisely why I want to give it one last look," Elias said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He picked up the leather-bound folder and closed it with a firm, decisive snap. "Let's reschedule for tomorrow morning." The silence in the room was heavy, charged with unspoken frustration. Marcus stood up slowly, his knuckles white as he pressed them against the table. "Elias, this doesn't make any sense. We're losing valuable time. Sterling has other interested parties. You know that?" "Then let them have them," Elias said, his gaze locking with his old friend's. "One night won't change anything." "Yes, it will." Javier slammed his hand on the table, his composure finally cracking. "The market is volatile, the stocks are high. It's now or never." Elias watched the man's agitated reaction, a cold knot of dread forming in his stomach. Isabella had been right about one thing. This level of pressure wasn't normal. It was desperate. "The decision is mine," he said, his voice low and firm. He tucked the contract under his arm. "And at this moment, I'm not signing." He looked at Marcus, whose face was a mask of controlled fury. "I'll see you tomorrow." Without giving them a chance to argue further, Elias walked out of the room, leaving behind a group of visibly angry and confused men. As he walked down the hallway, he felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. He had just bet his entire empire on the word of a cleaning lady, and he had no idea if he had just saved his company or plunged it into a crisis of his own making. At exactly 7 o'clock that evening, Elias entered the deserted break room. Isabella was already there, sitting in one of the plastic chairs, a small, worn backpack on her lap. She stood up as soon as she saw him. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice steadier than it had been that morning. "Show me what you have," Elias said, sitting across from her at the small, round table. Isabella opened her backpack and took out her phone. Her hands trembled slightly as she swiped through the photos. "It all started 3 weeks ago," she began, her voice low. "I was cleaning Mr. Thorne's office when I heard voices in the adjoining conference room." She paused, taking a deep breath. I recognized his voice and a woman's. A woman. Her name is Chloe, Isabella said, her eyes meeting his. Blonde, tall, always wearing expensive clothes. She swiped to a blurry photo taken through a crack in the door. This is her. A jolt went through Elias. Chloe Sterling, his ex-girlfriend, the same woman who had broken up with him 2 years ago, claiming they were too different. How was she involved in this? They're together now, Isabella said, her voice soft. And they're planning something against you. She swiped to the next screen and pressed play on a recording. The audio wasn't perfect, but the voices were clear enough. As soon as he signs, we'll have total control of the assets. It was Marcus's voice, confident and cold. Are you sure Elias doesn't suspect anything? Chloe's voice, laced with a familiar, dismissive tone. Elias has always been too naive to see when he's being betrayed. It was the same with you, wasn't it? It'll be the same now. And if he finds out, he won't. Trust me, Chloe, in 48 hours, the company will be ours. Elias ran a hand over his face, the world around him seeming to spin. Marcus's voice was unmistakable. And Chloe's laugh, the same laugh that had once enchanted him, now sounded like poison. Is there more? He asked, his voice hoarse. Isabella nodded and swiped through more photos, documents photographed in haste, contracts with different clauses than the ones Elias had signed off on, bank transfers to accounts he didn't recognize. They changed the original contract, Isabella said, pointing to one of the images. Look at this section. In the version you have, it says you retain 60% of the control. But in the real one, the one they plan to use when you sign, you only keep 20%. Elias took the phone, bringing it closer to his face. This is document forgery. It's a crime. And that's not all. Isabella swiped to another photo. This transfer for $15 million happened last week, from a Sterling account straight to Marcus Thorne's personal account. Elias stood up and walked to the window. The lights of Chicago glittered below, wrapped in the darkness of the night. But for him, everything seemed colorless. Why? He murmured, more to himself than to her. Marcus has been my best friend for 15 years. We went to college together. We built this company from the ground up. Sometimes money changes people, Isabella said, putting her phone away. Or maybe they were always like this, and you just didn't want to see it. Elias turned, still trying to process everything. Why are you telling me this? You could lose your job. Isabella hesitated. Because it's the right thing to do. I couldn't stay quiet, knowing they were setting you up like this. Elias looked at her closely. There was more to it. He could feel it. But Isabella clearly wasn't ready to tell him everything. This proof. How can I be sure it's real? I understand why you don't trust me, she said, putting her phone back in her backpack. But if you sign that contract tomorrow, you will lose everything. They've planned every step. Elias was silent for a long, agonizing moment. A part of him desperately wanted not to believe it. Marcus was like a brother to him. But the evidence... I need more, he said finally. I need to be absolutely sure. I can get more, she said, her voice firm, but it will be risky. Then be careful, Elias said, his gaze locking with hers. If this is true, if Marcus is really betraying me... He couldn't finish the sentence. We'll find out the truth, Isabella said with a quiet determination. After she left, Elias remained alone in the break room, staring out at the darkness. For the first time in 15 years, he doubted Marcus, and that doubt was growing inside him, a cold, heavy weight in the pit of his stomach. The next morning, Elias arrived at the office earlier than usual. He had spent the entire night thinking about the evidence Isabella had shown him. The images of the forged contracts wouldn't leave his mind, nor would the sound of Marcus's voice on the recording. He needed more answers. He went straight to the Human Resources Department and asked to see Isabella Rossi's file. Martha, the HR manager, looked at him with surprise. "The cleaner's file?" she asked, adjusting her glasses. "Is something wrong?" "Just a routine check," Elias lied. I need to confirm some data. Martha brought him a thin folder. Elias opened it, and his eyes widened as he saw the attached resume. Isabella Rossi, 28 years old, graduated from Northwestern University with a degree in business administration, specializing in corporate finance. Previous experience in business consulting at McKinsey & Company. McKinsey, Elias murmured, stunned. I'm sorry? Martha leaned in, trying to see what he was reading. It's nothing. Thank you. Elias quickly closed the folder and handed it back. He left the HR office, his mind reeling. Isabella had worked at McKinsey, one of the most respected consulting firms in the world. How did someone with that kind of resume end up as a cleaner? At lunchtime, Elias went looking for Isabella in the hallways. He found her on the 12th floor, cleaning the windows of one of the smaller conference rooms. Isabella, he said, approaching her, I need to talk to you. She turned, surprised to see him. Did something happen? Did you find out something about Mr. Thorne? Actually, Elias said, crossing his arms, I found out something about you. Isabella's face paled. Northwestern University, McKinsey & Company, corporate finance. She dropped the cleaning cloth and took a deep breath. You investigated my background. Why didn't you tell me who you really are? Isabella looked around to make sure they were alone before answering. Because it doesn't matter, she said, her voice laced with a bitter resignation. It doesn't matter how many degrees I have or where I've worked. To everyone here, I'm just the Latina cleaner. But McKinsey, that's impressive. How did I end up here? Isabella interrupted. You want the truth? I worked at McKinsey for 2 years. I was good, very good. But when it came time for a promotion, there was always a reason why I didn't get it. Elias listened intently, seeing the pain in her eyes. First, they said I needed more experience. Then they said my communication style didn't fit the company culture. Isabella laughed, a humorless sound. Translation, I was too competent for my position, but I didn't have the right look for a leadership role. That's discrimination. You could have sued. With what money? Isabella picked up her water bucket. And who would believe a Latina woman against a company like McKinsey? Elias was silent, trying to digest the injustice of it all. And your family? You mentioned a sister. Gabriella is 22, Isabella said, her voice softening. She was born with a congenital heart defect. We need $200,000 for the surgery. When I was fired from McKinsey, she hesitated. Or rather, when they asked me to resign, I had to take whatever I could get. That's why you're here. Isabella nodded. The health insurance helps cover part of Gabriella's treatment, and even with the low salary, I can pay for her medications. I can't afford to be unemployed. Elias felt a pang in his chest. Here was a brilliant woman, a graduate of one of the country's top universities, with experience at a major firm, working as a cleaner because of prejudice and the need to save her sister. Isabella, I had no idea. Now you do, she said, turning back to clean the windows. That's why I recognized the forged documents right away. I spent years analyzing corporate contracts. The inconsistencies jumped out at me. And that's why you warned me about the betrayal. Isabella stopped cleaning and faced him directly. Partly, yes. But also because, she hesitated, because you're different from the other executives here. I've watched you for months. You treat everyone with respect, regardless of their position. And when I saw that they were planning to destroy you, in the same way they destroyed my career, you couldn't stay silent. Exactly. Elias looked at her for a long, silent moment. Isabella Rossi wasn't just a cleaner who had overheard something by chance. She was a highly qualified professional who had identified a fraud and decided to act, even at the risk of losing the little she had left. Isabella, when this is all over... Elias! Marcus's voice echoed down the hallway. They both turned to see him approaching, a curious look on his face. What are you doing here? Marcus asked, his eyes darting between Elias and Isabella. Just checking on the cleaning, Elias replied quickly. You know how I am with details. Marcus looked at Isabella, who had gone back to cleaning the windows, pretending not to listen. "Since when do you personally care about the cleaning staff?" Marcus's tone was clearly suspicious. "Since I decided to pay more attention to the details," Elias said, forcing a smile. "Speaking of which, did you reschedule the meeting with Sterling for this afternoon?" "Yes, at 3 o'clock, Marcus said, his eyes still on Isabella. "I hope there are no more hesitations." "Of course not." Elias started walking towards the elevator. "Let's go for lunch. I need to review some contractual adjustments with you." Marcus followed him, but not before casting one last suspicious glance in Isabella's direction. In the elevator, Marcus pressed the button and turned to Elias. "You've been acting strange since yesterday. Is there something going on that I should know about?" Elias chose his words carefully. "Just pre-negotiation nerves. You know how I get before big decisions. Elias, we've been friends for 15 years. We built this company together." Marcus put a hand on his shoulder. "If something is bothering you, you can tell me." Elias looked into his best friend's eyes, searching for any sign of a lie, but Marcus seemed genuinely concerned. "I'm fine, Marcus. I just want to make sure we're doing the right thing." "Of course we are," Marcus said with a smile. "This merger is going to make us absolute leaders in the market. Trust me." The elevator doors opened and they stepped out. But as they walked down the hallway, Elias couldn't stop thinking about Isabella's words. Sometimes money changes people, and for the first time in 15 years, he began to wonder if he really knew Marcus at all. That afternoon, Isabella was finishing her cleaning of the executive washroom on the 15th floor when she heard footsteps approaching in the hallway. It was almost 5 p.m., and most of the executives had already left for the day. She frowned, curious about who would still be around. Through the crack of the slightly ajar door, she recognized Marcus Thorne's deep voice, speaking to someone else. A woman responded, and Isabella felt a shiver run down her spine. It was Chloe. "Are you sure it was her?" Chloe asked, her voice sharp with irritation. "Absolutely. I looked her up after I saw Elias talking to her yesterday," Marcus replied, his voice getting closer. "Isabella Rossi, 28 years old, formerly of McKinsey. Too smart for her own good." Isabella held her breath, pressing herself against the cool tile of the bathroom wall. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she realized they were talking about her. "And you think she overheard our conversation last week?" Chloe's voice was now laced with panic. "I'm sure of it. I reviewed the security footage. She was cleaning my office at the exact time we were finalizing the details." Marcus paused, and Isabella could hear his footsteps stop just outside the door. And today, Elias was completely different. He backed out of signing yesterday, started asking a bunch of questions about clauses we had already reviewed. "Damn it!" Chloe's voice rose, filled with panic. "If Elias finds out about us, about the money we've transferred—" "He won't," Marcus cut in, his voice firm and cold. "Not if we act fast. I need to get rid of the cleaner before she causes any more trouble." Isabella clapped a hand over her mouth, trying to stifle a gasp. They knew. They knew she had discovered their plan. "How?" Chloe asked, as if the idea itself were too absurd to be real. "I'll accuse her of theft, in front of everyone," Marcus said, his voice chillingly calm and calculated. "No one will believe the word of a fired cleaner over mine." "And what if Elias tries to defend her? Elias has been my best friend for 15 years. Even if he has his suspicions, he won't confront me in public over a cleaner." Marcus let out a low, cruel laugh. "He's far too predictable." Isabella closed her eyes, hot tears beginning to fall. She had risked everything to warn Elias about the betrayal, and now she was going to be destroyed for it. "When?" Chloe asked. "Now. I'm going to call her to the main auditorium. Tell her it's an urgent security meeting with all employees." The footsteps moved away, and Isabella remained in the bathroom for a few more minutes, trying to regain control. Her hands were shaking as she thought of Gabriella, her sick sister, who depended on her health insurance. If she was fired for cause, she would lose not only her salary, but also her medical coverage. The building's PA system crackled to life. All employees, please proceed immediately to the main auditorium for an urgent security meeting. Repeating, all employees to the main auditorium. Isabella took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and walked out of the bathroom. No matter what happened, she would not give Marcus the pleasure of seeing her break. The auditorium was packed. Employees from every department were whispering, curious about the sudden summons. Isabella entered through a back door, her head held high, and stood near the wall. Elias was sitting in the front row, next to the other executives. He looked around and for a moment, his eyes met hers. Isabella saw confusion on his face, as if he too had no idea what the meeting was about. Marcus walked onto the stage, carrying a manila folder. His face was serious, almost grim. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," he began, his voice echoing through the microphone. "Unfortunately, I need to address a very serious matter involving the security of our company." A nervous murmur spread through the room. "Yesterday, we discovered that confidential documents were photographed and removed from the executive offices," Marcus said, pausing dramatically. "This is not just a contractual violation, it's a case of corporate espionage." A shiver ran down Isabella's spine. She knew exactly where this was going. "After a detailed investigation with our security team, we have identified the person responsible." Marcus looked directly at her, his eyes cold and hard. "Isabella Rossi from the cleaning staff, please come forward." Every head in the room turned to her. Isabella felt hundreds of eyes on her, some curious, others already judging. Her legs were trembling, but she walked to the front of the room, maintaining her dignity despite the humiliation she knew was coming. "Ms. Rossi," Marcus continued, his tone authoritarian and cold, "photos of confidential company documents were found on your phone. How do you explain that?" Isabella looked at Elias in the front row. He looked shocked, torn between surprise and confusion. She could see the conflict written all over his face. Isabella began, but Marcus cut her off. "Furthermore, security cameras show you entering the executive offices outside of your cleaning schedule." He opened the folder and pulled out printed photos. "These images were recorded last week." The photos were passed down the front row. Isabella saw Elias take one, and the look on his face was not anger, but a deep, cutting disappointment. "Ms. Rossi, the theft of intellectual property is a federal crime," Marcus said, stepping down from the stage to approach her. "However, given your clean record, we are offering you termination for cause instead of involving the authorities." "That's not fair." Isabella finally found her voice. "I was trying to protect..." "Protect what?" Marcus interrupted harshly. "Your own interests. Were you going to sell this information to our competitors?" "No. I was protecting Mr. Vance from..." "Enough!" Marcus slammed his hand on the lectern. "I will not allow a dishonest employee to slander this company or its executives." Isabella looked at Elias in desperation, silently pleading with him to say something, anything, but Elias remained silent, his face tense, his jaw clenched. "Security, please escort Ms. Rossi out of the building," Marcus said, signaling to two uniformed guards. "She is no longer authorized to be on our premises." "Elias," Isabella cried out as the guards approached, "you know I was trying to help. You saw the proof." Elias stood up slowly, and for a moment Isabella believed he was finally going to take a stand, that he would confront the injustice right there in front of everyone. But then he looked away, his jaw tight. "I'm sorry it has come to this, Isabella," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "but the evidence is very clear." Isabella's heart shattered. The man she had risked everything for, the one she had tried to save from a devastating betrayal, was choosing to believe his betrayer. "Elias, please," her voice broke. "You know who I really am. You know I would never..." "That's enough, Ms. Rossi," Marcus interrupted, stepping down from the stage with a cruel, triumphant smile on his lips. "The show is over." Two security guards approached and took Isabella by the arms, but she shook them off with a surge of dignity. "I can walk on my own," she said, her voice steady again, even as tears streamed down her face. As she was escorted out of the auditorium, Isabella stopped and turned to face Elias one last time. "When you find out the truth," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "remember that you had the chance to do the right thing today, and you chose not to." Elias closed his eyes as if her words were physical blows. Isabella was led out of the building under the watchful eyes of hundreds of her colleagues. Some looked at her with pity, others with a sense of relief that the problem had been dealt with. On the sidewalk, one of the guards handed her a box with her few personal belongings. "I'm sorry, Ms. Rossi," the older guard said, clearly embarrassed. "Orders are orders." Isabella just nodded, took the box, and started walking towards the subway station. With every step, she felt the weight of the humiliation and the betrayal. But more than that, she felt the suffocating pain of knowing that Elias was walking straight into a trap. And now, she had no way to warn him. Back in the auditorium, Elias remained seated, even after all the other employees had left. Marcus approached and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I know this is difficult, Elias. She seemed like a good employee," he said, his voice laced with false sympathy. "But sometimes people disappoint us." Elias looked at his friend, trying to find any sign of a lie, but Marcus seemed genuinely concerned. "The evidence was very clear," Elias murmured, more to himself than to the other man. "Yes, it was," Marcus agreed. "But now we can focus on what really matters, the merger with Sterling. Our company is about to become an empire, Elias. We can't let disloyal employees destroy our dream." Elias nodded slowly, but a small, persistent part of him couldn't forget the honest desperation in Isabella's voice when she had called his name. "Did you reschedule the signing for tomorrow morning?" Marcus asked. "First thing, no more delays." "Yes," Elias said, still trying to process everything. "First thing." As he left the auditorium, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. And somewhere in Chicago, Isabella Rossi was walking the streets with a box of her belongings and a broken heart, still determined to find a way to save the man who had failed to save her. Elias couldn't sleep that night. The image of Isabella being escorted out of the building was seared into his mind. The desperation in her voice, the way she had called his name, pleading with him to defend her. And he had remained silent. At 3 a.m., he gave up trying to sleep. He got dressed quickly and drove to the office. The building was empty, save for the night security guards who patrolled the silent corridors. Elias used his access card to take the executive elevator to the top floor. There was something about Marcus's accusations that didn't add up. Isabella had shown a deep understanding of corporate contracts. She had identified discrepancies that only someone with financial expertise would notice. Why would a woman with that kind of ability get involved in corporate espionage? And why would she risk everything to warn him about a betrayal if she was part of it? Elias arrived at his office and turned on his computer. He decided to investigate on his own. He started by reviewing the files for the Sterling Corporation merger. He opened every document, every spreadsheet, every attached contract. Everything seemed normal at first glance, but Isabella had mentioned hidden clauses. If they were real, he knew they would be difficult to find. 3 hours later, he found the first irregularity. In the main contract on page 47, there was a reference to Addendum C, which Elias had never seen. According to the document, this addendum included technical specifications and the distribution of assets post-merger. But when he searched for Addendum C in the digital folder, it wasn't there. Intrigued, Elias accessed the company's main server. He used his CEO credentials to navigate through the most protected files. Finally, in an encrypted folder he had never noticed before, he found what he was looking for. Addendum C, Post-Merger Asset Distribution. Elias opened the file, and his blood ran cold. According to the document, after the merger, 80% of Vance Innovations' assets would be transferred to a subsidiary called Sterling International Holdings. Elias had never heard of this company. He kept reading and discovered that Sterling International Holdings was registered in the Cayman Islands and had only two main shareholders, Marcus Thorne and Chloe Sterling. "This can't be," Elias murmured, reading the document 3 more times to be sure. But it was all there, in small print and complex legal terms. The plan was ingenious and cruel. Elias would sign the contract, thinking he was retaining majority control of the company, when in reality he would be handing over almost everything to a shell company secretly controlled by his best friend and his ex-girlfriend. Elias printed the document and continued to dig deeper. Using his CEO credentials, he accessed the company's bank records. What he found confirmed his worst fears. In the last 2 months, several transfers classified as merger preparation had been made, totaling $23 million. The money had supposedly been transferred to Sterling Corporation's accounts, but Elias noticed something strange. The account numbers didn't match the ones listed in the original contract. Using his access to the corporate banking system, Elias traced where the money had really gone. $23 million had been transferred to a personal account in the name of M. Thorne, Marcus Thorne. 15 years of friendship, Elias whispered, feeling as if he had been punched in the stomach. But there was more. Elias found emails between Marcus and Sterling executives that he had never received. The messages revealed that the merger was, in fact, a hostile takeover in disguise. Sterling Corporation wasn't even a real, active company. It was just a front for the scam that Marcus and Chloe had orchestrated. In an email from 3 weeks ago, Marcus wrote, "Elias is completely naive. 15 years of friendship have blinded him to the possibility of betrayal. By the time he realizes what has happened, we will have total control of the assets and be out of the country." Chloe replied, "You were right. He really is far too predictable." Elias had to stop reading. His hands were shaking as he held the mouse. His best friend, the man who had been the best man at his wedding, who had cried with him when his mother passed away, who had built a company with him brick by brick, that man was about to destroy him completely. He continued his investigation and discovered even more details of the plan. After Elias signed the contract, Marcus would announce an emergency restructuring, citing fabricated financial problems. Elias would be forced to step down as CEO for the good of the company, and Marcus would assume total control. Then all the real assets would be transferred to Sterling International Holdings, leaving Elias with nothing but debt and legal liabilities. The plan was so well crafted that Elias felt a mixture of disgust and a dark, grudging respect. Marcus had planned everything down to the smallest detail for months, maybe even years. Elias also found recordings of phone calls archived by the company's security system. One of them, from 2 weeks ago, was between Marcus and Chloe. "Marcus, are you sure Elias won't suspect anything?" "Chloe, I dated him for 2 years. I know his every weakness. Elias trusts people too much. It's his greatest strength and his greatest weakness. And if he finds out before the signing, he won't. But if he does, we have the forged documents. We can say he was the one trying to commit fraud. It'll be my word against his. Do you hate him that much?" "It's not hate, it's ambition. Elias was a good boyfriend, but he was always too small for my dreams. With you, I can have everything I've ever wanted." Elias paused, the recording sickened. Chloe had broken up with him 2 years ago, saying they wanted different things in life. The truth was, she was just looking for someone more ambitious, more willing to cross lines. By 6 a.m., Elias had enough evidence to put Marcus and Chloe in prison, but he realized something even more painful. Isabella Rossi had tried to save him, and he had ignored her at the moment she needed him most. He remembered her words from the day before. "When you find out the truth, remember that you had the chance to do the right thing today, and you chose not to." She was right, completely right. Now, Elias had to fix the terrible mistake he had made. But first, He had to make sure Marcus and Chloe didn't find out that he knew everything. The signing meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. He had only 3 hours. Elias copied all the files to a flash drive and emailed them to himself from 3 different accounts. Then he cleared his browser history and shut down the computer. As he was leaving the office, his phone rang. It was Marcus. "Elias, good, you answered," Marcus said, his voice laced with feigned concern. "I couldn't sleep after what happened yesterday with the cleaner. I know it must have shaken you." "I'm fine," Elias replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "It was difficult, but you were right. The evidence was clear." Elias could hear the relief in his voice. "I'm glad you understand. Are you ready for the meeting today? Our big moment has arrived." "Of course. 9 o'clock, right?" "That's right. Elias, I want you to know that whatever happens in business, our friendship will always mean more to me." Elias closed his eyes, feeling the weight of that lie. "To me too, Marcus. To me too." As he hung up, Elias knew exactly what he had to do. Not just to save his company, but to right the wrong he had done to the courageous woman who had risked everything to warn him of the betrayal. Isabella Rossi had tried to save him. Now it was his turn to save her. But first, he had to find her. And after having publicly humiliated her the day before, Elias wasn't sure if she would even be willing to look him in the face again. Watching from his office window as Chicago awoke under the morning sun, Elias Vance prepared for the most important fight of his life, a fight not just for his company, but for his own soul. Because he had learned a painful lesson. Sometimes the most important people in our lives are the ones who are brave enough to tell us the truths we don't want to hear. And Isabella Rossi had done just that. Now it was time to honor her courage with his own.